Approximately 2,000 years ago, an initial form of agriculture reached the drainages of the Mississippi River, and peoples who had previously been nomadic, living a hunting and gathering lifeway, began to create more permanent settlements on the landscape. With the establishment of more permanent villages came increasing levels of complexity in human cultures. New relationships emerged between members of the cultures, which required new adaptations to this changed lifeway. The beginnings of farming changed human culture globally and profoundly changed human relationships to the environment forever. This presentation introduces the beginnings of village cultures to the northern plains and focuses on the Mitchell Prehistoric Indian Village site located in Mitchell, South Dakota, as a specific archaeological example. The people living in these plains villages practiced a farming, hunting, fishing, and gathering lifeway. Their diets were well balanced. Food from crops grown in their gardens were enhanced with meat from hunting and fishing. Their diet also included many wild plants, nuts, and berries, which they gathered. When people settled into permanent villages and began to grow crops, human relationships changed, becoming far more complex. The cultures began to become stratified, dividing people within a group into leaders and followers. Additionally, the way in which people interacted with their environment became more complicated. When cultural groups established permanent villages, their area of movement became more restricted since neighboring villages came to be built up and down the river and creek drainages. A good analogy would be to consider throwing a pebble in a creek and watching the rings of force spread out from the center. The rings represent the land across which the village population could gather the necessary resources for survival, such as animals to hunt for meat and the wood required for both fuel and the construction of earth lodges. Due to the close proximity of each village to the next, the available resources became strained, and eventually it was easier to relocate the village. Hence, earlier villages were abandoned and new villages were established on the next drainage system. In South Dakota, the earliest villages were along the drainage of the Big Sioux River. They date to approximately AD 900. After a generation or two, and a maximum of 100 years, groups relocated to the James River drainage. Again, a similar abandonment occurred within a generation, leading to settlements along the Missouri River. Except for a small number of village sites along the Cheyenne and Belle Fourche rivers, the village cultures on the Missouri River were the culmination of Plains village sites. This is an artist's depiction of the Missouri River bottom showing a prehistoric Mandan village from approximately AD 1300 on the bluff on the horizon. Village peoples utilized the river floodplain for their gardens. This map shows the position of Mitchell in relation to other important sites, including the urban Mississippian center of Cahokia. Crops like maize were domesticated in Mexico, and farming as a way of life slowly spread from the Gulf of Mexico up the Mississippi River. Prehistoric residents gradually spread out from the Mississippi drainage system, including westward along river drainages, reaching South Dakota by about AD 900. The Mitchell site represents one of the earliest such farming villages in the area. This is an artist's rendition of the urban center of the community of Cahokia in AD 1150. Cahokia is considered to be the largest pre-contact settlement in North America. This map shows the large number of village sites known to archaeologists within the region. Many of these have been badly damaged or destroyed by modern agriculture or inundation from the damming of the rivers. This is an artist's reconstruction of an initial Middle Missouri village with its rectangular earth lodges. This photograph of the last Earth Lodge village of the Upper Missouri in North Dakota was taken by pioneer photographer Stanley J. Morrow in 1870. The village was called Like a Fish Hook. By this time, the lodges had become circular in shape, having been influenced by people from the Central Plains, but many other things remained the same as in the villages of 900 years earlier. This is a watercolor of the inside of an earth lodge by artist Carl Bodmer, entitled Interior of a Mandan Earth Lodge. Pictured is an overview of the excavation floor inside the Archeodome at the Mitchell Prehistoric Indian Village. The Archeodome encloses a portion of the archaeological site and houses laboratory areas for processing artifacts and exhibits. This is a plan view or technical illustration of the excavation floor at the Mitchell Prehistoric Indian Village, showing features such as cache or storage pits and special activity areas. This archaeological feature represents an area of intense cooking activities. Note the concentration of crushed food bone and fire-cracked rock. This feature may represent a special activity area, such as a place where bones were crushed and boiled to extract fat. This activity is called bone grease rendering. This pit is the same bone grease rendering feature shown in the previous slide, now emptied of its contents. Here analysis is in progress, sorting crushed or comminuted bone from the same feature. Bone was crushed and then boiled to extract bone grease. The grease was mixed with dried meat to make a high-energy food with a long storage life. That foodstuff is known as pemmican on the inset photo. This artist's reconstruction shows the process of obtaining bone grease to mix with dried meat. The boiling pit, on the right, is lined with a bison hide. Hot rocks were lifted into the pit to boil water, and the crushed bone was added to the boiling water for bone grease extraction. Pictured is a clay-capped pit feature exposed during excavation. The same clay-capped pit being excavated in cross-section to reveal horizontal and vertical dimensions. The clay covered an area of ash. This cross-section shows an ash lens containing carbonized plant seed remains. Pictured is the base of the clay-capped pit feature. Reddish-orange color of sediments indicates an intense heat event. It appears this may have been a cooking feature that related to the processing of plant foods. Students are pictured doing fine sieve, 500 micron water flotation to recover charcoal and carbonized plant remains from the ash in the feature. The plant materials have only survived because they are burnt, so do not decay. They float in water and can be extracted from the soil and collected and caught in a sieve. Carbonized sunflower left and maize, corn kernels that were recovered through flotation from ash feature. These specimens date to approximately AD 1050. Here's a close-up photo of carbonized corncob fragments from the pit feature. A view of the top of a cache pit feature, light brown on the upper right, as it relates to the excavation grid. The vertical west wall of the excavation grid exhibits concentration of food bone and fire-cracked rock in deposits above the level of the cache pit. This is a view of the cache pit following excavation. This cache pit was about 1 meter in depth and was bell-shaped. Pictured are heavily used discarded bison bone shoulder blade or scapula hoes. These specimens were recovered at the bottom of the cache pit. On the top is pictured a drawing of a bison scapula hoe. The bottom image is a photograph from 1912 of a Hidatsa woman, buffalo bird woman, hoeing squashes with a bison bone hoe on the Fort Berthold Reservation in North Dakota. The drawing and photograph are from an ethnographic account by Gilbert Wilson titled Agriculture of the Hidatsa Indians, an Indian Interpretation from 1917. This overview shows intersecting cache pits. It can be extremely complicated to determine which pits are earlier and which are later in the sequence of utilization. Earlier pits were abandoned and filled with trash. Later, a new pit was dug, which intruded into and through the earlier pit feature. This demonstrates the continued reuse of an area of the site for food storage by the prehistoric inhabitants. Here, students are point plotting the position of another cache pit using a total station surveying instrument. Artifacts and features are recorded in place, in situ, with a precision instrument before they are removed from the ground. This allows archaeologists to create an accurate three-dimensional map of the excavation site that shows the spatial relationship of the recovered artifacts and features. One of the bell-shaped cache pits encountered during excavation. Note the dense gravel layer in the base of the pit. This is a very rare example of preserved grass that lined a storage pit. Organic materials generally do not preserve well in sites of the northern plains due to the wet and dry climate cycles. Usually, they have to be burnt to survive. This is an artist's reconstruction drawing showing the sequence of cache pit creation and use. Cache pits were initially lined with a wet clay to help seal the sides and bottom. This was followed by adding a grass lining. Food storage comprised of drying the plant items to help prevent spoilage. Dried food, like corn cobs, corn kernels, beans, and squash, as well as tools, were stored in such pits. The cache pits are then capped off to keep them dry and also to disguise, with refuse and ashes, where they are to discourage any potential raiders. On the left is a diagram of a bell-shaped cache pit redrawn from a sketch by Edward Goodbird, son of Buffalo Bird Woman, about 1912. On the top right is a reproduction of Goodbird's sketch of a grass bundle, which was tied with a rope of grass, and on the bottom right is a depiction of the grass being attached to the wall of the pit. The floor and sides of the pits were sealed with clay and then lined with grass. The pit was topped with layers of grass, earth, and charcoal, and sealed with a clay cap. These drawings are from an ethnographic account by Gilbert Wilson. This museum reconstruction shows a filled cache pit. It would have resembled the image on the left when in use. The right side shows what the remains of a cache pit are like when archaeologists excavate them. After use as a cache pit, the people of the village would frequently use the pit to dispose of trash. Archaeologists usually find the remains of that trash with the organic materials decomposed. We end up with soil, broken pottery, bone, shell, lithics, and ash. The ashes might contain burnt plant material that can assist in identifying the plants utilized by villagers. Students are pictured using a string grid frame to produce a plan view drawing of part of an excavation unit. The string grid is divided into 10 centimeter squares and gives greater precision in producing a technical drawing. The students are currently working on an area of fire-cracked rocks mixed with food debris. This is a photograph of the dense concentration of fire-cracked rock at the base of a prehistoric roasting oven. Hot rock was layered with meat and vegetables. The layers were then covered with earth and left to bake for several hours. Village peoples used dogs to help with transport. This watercolor by artist Carl Bodmer shows the Mandan using dogs to pull a sled. Dogs also dragged loads on travois like this. This photograph was taken in 1903. This is a photograph of a dog skull recovered from excavations at the Mitchell site. This dog's teeth are very worn down, indicating that it must have lived to a considerable age. Drawings of typical characteristics, vessel shapes, and decoration of ceramic wares from the region at approximately AD 1300. This is a collage of typical pots from the initial Middle Missouri period, as well as some types traded from or influenced by Cahokia. On the left is a miniature ceramic pot, likely a child's toy, and on the right is a side-notched projectile point, arrow point, recovered during excavations at the Mitchell Prehistoric Indian Village. The rim area of this ceramic pot was decorated with a wolf or dog image. This carved freshwater clam shell was likely used as a fishing lure or spinner. This ceramic disc may be a gaming piece. The ethnographic record reflects numerous examples of games that were played by both children and adults. This knife is made of Bijou Hills quartzite. The quarry for Bijou Hills quartzite is located near Chamberlain, South Dakota. It is an excellent material for stone tools because the cutting edge can withstand heavy use. This Bijou Hills quartzite knife has side notches for hafting to a bone or wooden handle. This Bijou Hills quartzite knife blade has been heavily burned. This projectile point has both side and basal notches. It is a classic Cahokia point. Cahokia was an immense prehistoric village complex from AD 700 to 1400, located near present-day St. Louis. The presence of this point type at the Mitchell site demonstrates contact with Mississippi River cultural groups. A drilled stone limestone bead. A flaked stone drill bit made out of Knife River flint. Such a drill bit could have been used to drill the hole in the bead, as it is the correct size. This unusual bright red slipped pot with heavy reached decoration recovered at the Mitchell site is not local. It was produced by Caddoan peoples and may have been traded all the way from Texas. This is a sickle for harvesting plant materials. The bone sickle was produced from a bison scapula shoulder blade. This slab of stone has been used for grinding red iron ochre mineral pigment, which you can still see embedded in the surface. Ochre was a commonly used pigment to produce slip for pottery and for paint in prehistory. A good reason to excavate within the Archeodome at the Mitchell site. Pictured is a late July thunderstorm moving into Mitchell, South Dakota. The cloud shape, called either a pileus or cap cloud, indicates incoming severe weather conditions.